Welcome, everybody. Thanks very much for attending this evening's meeting. This is one of our regular fortnightly Monday night discussions organised by Talking About Socialism from a Marxist Point of View. We're unashamedly communists or socialists, depending on our preferred term. We want to see a complete change in the way that society is organised. We're facing a general election in Britain, as you will all know, and we've had various discussions, the last one being what's wrong with Labour. And tonight we're pleased to have two of the comrades from Manchester who are involved in a new project, a new initiative called Communist Future. We've got Ed Potts and Chris Strafford, who've both been involved in organising that initiative, which is a welcome one and one that causes me excitement and very, very positive about it. I'm sure there are lots of lessons to learn from it as it develops. So what we're going to do is I'm going to invite Ed, first of all, to introduce for about 15 minutes. We'll then take questions. We normally limit it to 3 minutes per intervention. And then I'll then call Chris in to deal with any specific questions and to develop the points in the discussion. And then we'll go round for a further round of questions or contributions. It's an opportunity for everybody to ask what the comrades in Manchester are doing, but also to comment on what you see taking place at the moment in the general election. What do you make of the various left alternatives to Labour, the Workers' Party of Britain, Jeremy Corbyn, the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, the plethora of independents and so on? How do they meet the requirements? Does Communist Future meet the requirements? Hopefully it'll be a good discussion. And just to remind everybody that the discussion is going to be recorded and we'll be putting it up on YouTube later on. So just be careful what you say. And if you don't want to be seen, turn your video off if you're going to speak. So with that, I'm going to invite Ed, please, for 15 minutes. Off you go, Ed. Thanks.
Well, thanks very much, Nick, and thanks for the invitation. We're very pleased to be here to introduce and explain the campaign that we're currently waging in Manchester Central as Communist Future. I think our starting point, or my starting point, is goes back to William Morris, the famous socialist and artist, who once asked himself, what is the present business of socialists? And his answer, he gave a long answer, but his short answer was, in the first place, to make more socialists. And I remind myself quite often of how important that task is. Communist Future really arose out of a series of conversations among comrades, a group of us who'd known each other quite a long time and worked together in different things. All of us live in Manchester now and have experience of working together. And we'd reached, I think, similar conclusions about the challenges facing communists and the communist movement. And probably the most important conclusion that we'd reached was that the lack of a proper communist party, a mass democratic communist party in this country, had had a substantial impact on our capacity, our collective capacity, and our confidence to argue openly for our ideas. And this manifested, I think, in a number of ways. First, I think there are a good number of people who hold communist views and who have nothing objectively preventing them from being active as communists and proselytizing for communism, trying to win other people to communism. But nonetheless, increasingly, a lot of those people are falling into inactivity, and their communist politics are ultimately just being reduced to opinions that they hold more or less privately, instead of those ideas being the backbone of what they do to organize around them and to win other people to those ideas. I think another trend that we all agreed that we'd seen was communists adopting what you might call a path of least resistance, and simply going with the flow of activism of various kinds, whether that be in trade unions or community groups or in the Labour Party in recent years. activism which, while it might keep you busy and may sometimes be more or less rooted in working class politics, doesn't provide necessarily a clear path or a clear opportunity to advance communist politics and the cause of communism. And finally, I think another trend or phenomenon that we observed was there are communists who remain active and committed, but we, I should say, have experienced a drain on our skills and our experience in arguing for communist ideas. And what I mean by that is, if communism is something that you simply discuss with other communists and nobody else, well, not only are our numbers never going to grow, more likely the opposite, but crucially, when we really need to put our politics into practice and try and win people over, we increasingly find that we don't have the kind of practice and experience that we need in putting arguments for communist politics in simple terms that will be understood easily and persuasive to a whole range of different audiences in society, many of which have never heard communist ideas before, or a long way from being convinced of them. So having discussed all of that, we thought it was necessary to try something new, a new tactic to break out of our isolation. And it has to be acknowledged, I think, that going from that to let's stand a candidate in the general election is perhaps not the obvious choice that people might have expected us to make for half a dozen communists looking for something to do. Electoral work, intervening in elections, is viewed with quite a bit of skepticism by many people on the left, for some good reasons and for some not so good reasons. We reached the conclusion that intervening in bourgeois elections, that is, the elections that take place in our limited democracy as it exists right now, they have a lot of limitations, cost, practicality, barriers to entry, which are designed to exclude our class from intervening properly in democracy. But nonetheless, they're also a massive opportunity, because what they represent is a time in a short window of time when political ideas are openly contested, and the different parties and trends and factions within society set out their stall and put forward their proposals, and people feel able to engage with that in a way that perhaps they don't at other times. And we think that communism should be right in the thick of that. We should be in the fray, arguing for our politics as an alternative to all of the other ideas that are put forward. So to address one obvious point which has been raised is, why are you only doing this in one constituency, in one city? And really it's just a case of that's the way it happened. It's practicality. That was where we found that we had a critical mass of comrades with similar views who were ambitious enough to attempt a tactic like this. It certainly isn't designed to be a local initiative or be a symptom of some kind of latent parochialism, as some people have suggested. But it is something that we've decided to do in our area because we thought we had the critical mass and the determination to pull it off. And we think that the road back for our movement from the series of defeats and demoralization and isolation that it's suffered has to start somewhere. And we need to be creative with how we break out of that isolation. I should note that we are registered nationally with the Electoral Commission. So that means Communist Future is registered nationally, can stand candidates anywhere we like in the country. And we hope with what we're doing that we will win at least some of the arguments, that the tactic of intervening in elections as we've done is something worthwhile. And that tactic, or something like it, should be adopted more widely in the future once this election is done. And we thought also that it was worthwhile making a systematic attempt to pursue a tactic which we think will be among the range of tactics that the future mass communist party that we all look to will have in its arsenal of tactics that it can deploy. Of course, you know, a party like that will have a lot of different tactics that it can pursue, but we think elections will be one of them. So what have we done? Well, we've taken advantage of the window of opportunity that's been afforded us in this election In general elections in the UK, all candidates are allowed free posting of one leaflet to every household in the constituency, provided, of course, that you pay for the leaflets and get them to the Royal Mail. So that's what I was doing at 8 a.m. this morning. I was at the Manchester Central Royal Mail sorting office, dropping off 59,400 leaflets in 75 cardboard boxes. I think that 60,000 households getting the ideas of communism through their door is a serious step forward for our movement. And it would be even more of a serious step forward if that was replicated nationally. It's a common sense opportunity that we can take advantage of. I will just note as an aside that the cost of the leaflets was around £2,000 to have them printed. While we've done a good job so far in fundraising, we still have a way to go. And so I'd ask comrades who are in a position to consider a donation to our cause to consider doing that, and I'll post a link to do so in the chat in a little while. But simply posting a leaflet through everybody's door would be in itself quite passive. So what we've also done is we've been out in working class communities knocking on doors in order to have a proper conversation with people and put forward our ideas fully, and to find out for ourselves what works and what doesn't when trying to convince people of communist ideas. So far during the campaign, we've focused primarily on two areas, and I appreciate not everybody knows Manchester that well, but the first area we've done is Cheetham Hill, which is an overwhelmingly Muslim working class area. And the other area that we focused on are the council estates in Ancoats, which are right on the periphery of the city centre, where there's a huge amount of redevelopment and foreign investment pouring in, but these council estates are clinging on, mostly inhabited by white British working class people. So two very different wards, very different profiles. We've experienced different challenges in each, but both have been incredibly worthwhile. In Ancoats, plenty of people have had Reform UK posters in their windows. And I think I challenge anyone to tell me why it's not crucial that we're out as communists speaking to those people and finding out why that they're voting or considering voting for reform and trying to win those people back from that reactionary tide. It's also a systematic approach to our tactic because, of course, what we're going to do come election day is we're going to measure our votes specifically in those polling districts where we focused on, and hopefully there'll be at least a small appreciable impact.
5 minutes left, Ed.
Thanks very much, Nick. In terms of the personnel involved, I just want to speak briefly about that because very quickly we recruited, or I should say Chris recruited, two comrades who are artists, and besides contributing a huge amount in terms of their skills and labour, graphic design skills are not commonly found among left-wingers, I think we would all agree. They've also challenged us to think and rethink how we express ourselves, how to find the best way of conveying a concept or making an argument for a particular concept. We have a very full manifesto. Our candidate is Katrina Rylance, who some of you will know, and she very bravely volunteered to be our candidate, but she also wrote the first draft of our manifesto, which we then worked on collaboratively. I think on the whole, it's a document to be proud of, and we welcome everybody's feedback on it precisely because we know inevitably it's not perfect. More than a work of art, it's intended to be a tool in the hands of workers, and like any tool, it needs to be fashioned and refined so that it does the job properly. So overall, what our intervention comes down to, I think, is this. We think the ideas of communism are the ideas that society needs to change meaningfully for the better. And we think that those ideas are better than any others on offer from any other party or ideological trend in society. And so we think it's natural that as communists, we should behave as such, behave with that confidence in our ideas. And when it comes to a time of open contestation of political ideas and political programs for what we should do to change our society, we think communism should be put forward on that stage as an equal alternative, and we should have confidence that we should ask people to choose communism over all the other trends and ideologies that exist out there. And we think communism is, at its heart, really quite a simple set of ideas, and communism is for everyone. And so in that spirit, I'm going to finish with a poem. I understand that poems are allowed in these discussion sessions. And it's a poem by Bertolt Brecht. It's called In Praise of Communism. It makes sense. Anyone can understand it. It's simple. You're not an exploiter, so you can grasp it. It's good for you, so find out more about it. The idiots call it idiotic, and the filthy call it filth. But it's the opposite of idiocy and of filth. The exploiters say that it is a crime, but we know it means the end of crime. It is not madness, but the end of madness. It is not chaos, but order. It is that simple thing, so hard to do. Thank you.
Excellent, Ed. Thank you very much for that very informative introduction, and thank you for finishing off with a poem by the great Bertolt Brecht. So what I'm going to do now, comrades, is open it up for questions and comments. So don't hold back. I mean, this is an initiative that perhaps we haven't seen for quite some time. So I've got Minnie and Graham got their hands up. Let's see other hands. So Minnie, is that you going to speak?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Am I on? Is the usual time begun? Yeah, well, I really, really appreciated that Bertolt Brecht poem. I've seen some great Bertolt Brecht in Manchester, including Man is to Man at the Contact Theatre. I've seen Roundheads and Pointed Heads at LIPA, the Liverpool Institute for Performing Arts. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. That's got the Whitewash song in it, by the way. I think it's really good. It was great to hear from you, Ed, and see Ed and Chris, comrades, back on here. Really, really inspiring. Just to say, I'd be interested to know more about people's reactions. I'd like to hear more about people's reactions on the doorstep. Yeah, and I was looking at the manifesto. I looked quite a lot at the Revolutionary Communist Party manifesto. I found that, and I've watched Fiona Lally sitting out her stall and giving a talk, and she's great. She's got loads of energy. She's great. The young people are great. But when I read their website, I find there's a heck of a lot of words on there, and it's kind of and they do harp on about Russia and the Russian Revolution a lot, Lenin, etc., etc. I think you can have a bit too much of that, and I found it very we're gonna do. It's kind of this tone, kind of and then after that I read Communist Future, and I felt like I'd come down to earth. And I just felt like it's calm, it's set out, it's basically saying, let's have a chat, let's get together, let's, what we're going to do, sort of thing. We're the working class. But the thing I thought was, obviously it's being developed and it's in development, was that the vision didn't quite come through of the basics of what this communist future would be. That's my constructive criticism. But I liked the tone very much. Is my 3 minutes up? Has the factory watched?
No, you've got another 40 minutes, 40 seconds.
Yeah. I loved E.P. Thompson's essay on time. That's fantastic. About how as working class, we just like to go out and watch things and go out gazing and watching what's going on. Fabulous. Yeah, I'm really inspired. I'd like to see more in the manifesto about, the working class getting a hold of, running production, and more about the ideas of holding land in common, stuff like that, obviously relating to today. Anyway, that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Spot on, Minnie. Thanks very much.
Yeah, getting used to it.
Richard. Richard Harris.
Thank you. I must say, I think that was a fabulous presentation by Ed, and what I've seen on the website is very, very is I was going to say very, very good. But I'm overdoing it. It's pretty good indeed, I must say. I'll mention why I have a reservation at the moment. I'm the only communist groups I've ever spotted as standing on a communist platform for election in Britain is, of course, the Socialist Party of Great Britain, who do stand on the maximum programme, communism tomorrow. Although, of course, that tradition, as we all know, has the severe weakness that it has failed to analyse the modern capitalist state. I think principally, of course, because its politics were formed not just before the Russian Revolution, but even before the First World War, when everybody was shocked by what happened to German social democracy, and therefore it called the SDP program of slowly build each year, don't get entangled in the state, not a penny, not a man, all that kind of thing. That didn't work. It collapsed. The biggest seeming Marxist party in the world ended up supporting the war. So I think we need some kind of criticism of social democracy in its modern sense rather than its older sense, because I'm not giving advice to the Manchester comrades, who, for heaven's sakes, have launched this marvellous initiative. And I'm miles from Manchester. I won't be able to get up there to support you either. But without going all, the key reservation I must say I had when reading the website was a confidence in trade unions that I think the left communist movement, for example, has just said they're rubbish. You know, they're like the Labour Party. The modern Labour Party, they are organisations that were established by workers historically in the 19th century, but now are absolutely, they are the capitalist state's police force in the working class. The shop stewards movement that's been destroyed by both Thatcher and by the trade union movement, which never fought Thatcher's roles. And I've known well closely several trade union general secretaries, and they're bloody pleased with the regime that Thatcher introduced, giving the general secretary and trade union bureaucracies complete control over rebellious activity within their trade unions.
Richard, I'm going to cut you off there and call you back in later, if that's okay.
Sure, of course.
Okay, so come on, there's got to be a lot more questions about what's behind the Manchester initiative and what they're doing and some other. So, is it Chris? Is that your hand up?
It is, yes.
Yeah, Chris, you fire away.
Has my picture gone bad or something?
Yeah, we've
problems with my camera. It could have gone bad. Yeah, there's not a shortage of competition in the field into which this initiative is pitched. I mean, in neighbouring constituencies, I think, fortunately, not the same ones to where Cat's standing. You've definitely got the Communist League. You've got the CPB to the north in Bury South. I don't know if the Socialist Equality Party is standing, but they have stood in that area previously. So even in that immediate area of central Manchester, there have been a record of parties. So first question is effectively, how do you differentiate? Do you differentiate? How do you think you should react to people doing similar things? I don't know whether anything like Tusk is standing in Manchester. There are also things, particularly it makes a lot of noise in Manchester, things like the RCP and indeed the YCL, who have been very visible over the last 12 months, arguing what is effectively, again, a very similar idea. We've got to be communists. In fact, I mean, I don't know how much you go up and down Oxford Road in Manchester, and for those not in Manchester, you wouldn't know it. But most of last year was just poster warfare between the YCL and the RCP. You know, every bus stop was covered almost alternate weeks by the other organisation. You know, aimed at students, to big Oxford Road, Manchester, mega student zone. So I suppose I'm sort of asking, how does it fit in? Because I mean, I totally agree with the bottom line starting point where you're coming from. Totally get that, and I would say it's something that in different forms I've tried to do in different ways over a long time. So I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thanks very much, Chris. Can I see who else wants to come in? So people that have heard about this for the first time, what's your reaction? What do you think? Good, bad, surprised? How does it compare with the other candidates that you see on the left? What I would talk about perhaps as the Corbynite left or the reformist left. Is what the comrades in Manchester is doing, is that what's necessary? Is it a waste of time? Can it be replicated? Can it be broadened out? Chris, I'm going to invite you to come back on a few of the points that have been made, and then that's while other people are thinking about it. So, Chris, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I will do. Ed covered quite a lot. I just wanted to start with what you said at the beginning, Nick, actually, is you asked, does a communist future meet our requirements for what is currently needed? And I just quickly wrote down on my notes in capital letters, no, absolutely not. Because we are a very, very small intervention, very, very small project to raise some of the things that Ed has already spoke about, to push the arguments that you can stand openly as communists and you can organize and win people on that basis. And I think, the RCP have done a bigger job, and not the same way that we have done, but in a very bold and an interesting way that deserves comrades' attention as well. I think in terms of reactions on the doorstep, I think Ed's already said that we've gone into two quite different working class areas, and I would say that we spoke to a couple of hundred people now. We've knocked quite a few doors, and if you can see a slight red glow on my face and neck and what have you, it's because me and direct sunlight do not go together. But the conversations on the doorstep have been interesting. Lots of people are angry with the way everything has gone over the last 12 years. People recognize people don't need to be told that the war in Palestine is bad. Likewise, they don't need to be told that the NHS is on its arse. They have an idea that actually there's a bigger problem than just the Tory party or this or that thing falling apart. It's very hard conversations on migration and the worries that people have around that. And I mean, one of the interesting things that may interest many is that in Ancoats, what you can see is you have a working class area that has been there for decades and decades. It's slowly being encircled by these brand new buildings built for students. Some of them are gated communities, and you can see ever closer encroaching on this former council estate. And you can see there's a real difference when you cross from one road, which is basically in the city centre, which is New Islington, into Ancoats proper. You can see that the pub that was closed down 15 years ago is now still just a pile of rubble. And when we spoke to residents there, I mean, they were very clear that it's a matter of time before Manchester City Council or whichever developer seeks to move them on to somewhere else. In terms of the manifesto and raising other things and what have you. I mean, the fact of the matter is we ran out of time. We wanted a manifesto that gave a whole story that talked about the journey from the capitalist present to a communist future, talked about the state, in terms of the need for the state to be overcome and overthrown, what we wanted to do, and we only really managed to do it with Palestine, which we thought was the most important thing in this election, is to get other statements, other positions out on housing, gay, lesbian liberation, women's liberation, what have you. Manchester, more detailed discussion on Manchester. So we ran out of time, but we were definitely going to pick that up, and we will pick that up again with not just ourselves, but with all comrades in Manchester and further afield. So when Richard says, you probably don't want your advice, we do want your advice. We want all comrades' advice and all comrades' criticisms. On the trade unions, I think I would agree with what Richard said. For me, I mean, in most workplaces that I have worked in, the trade unions have been an adjunct of the human resources department. You have sickness absence meeting and the trade union officials there. It's already, cozy deal, what have you. I think what we wanted to express in our manifesto is that we have just come out of 18 months of prolonged trade union struggle. And in Manchester, we have, different groups of workers on strike, different large groups of workers on strike. Obviously, we have good BMA pickets here. We have strikes on the railways with the cleaners at the moment. We wanted to position ourselves firmly in that camp. But I do take Richard's point that that we do need to develop a much more critical, at least critical position in terms of how the trade unions have developed and the trade union leadership. Chris spoke about where do we all fit in with the different groups and what have you. Communist League, I think we just write them off. I mean, they are linked to a position on Palestine that is so backwards, so abhorrent that I don't think we can even consider them anywhere near our movement. Is where I would put it. In terms of the CPB, I mean, if I was in Bury South, I would go and vote for Dan Ross. I would say that you should vote for the CPB if you're there, if any of the other constituencies. Well, I mean, just as an anecdote, after canvassing on Sunday, me and Ed went for some food, and we were sitting down, and the manager of this pub gathered up all his staff and gave them all a dressing down and threatened to sack any one of them on the spot if any of them were lazing around in the kitchen or what have you. That was the same day I also was reading Dan Ross talk about how important local businesses are and how communists support local businesses and small business owners and what have you. So we have a very different approach, I think, in terms of how we see class politics and how class power to Morning Star's Communist Party. Likewise with the Workers' Party, who is a hodgepodge. We are standing in the same constituency as Parham Hashimi. Seems like a very nice guy. Seems to be, wants to do good things for the NHS and what have you, but doesn't really talk about the working class. Doesn't talk about working class power. Doesn't talk about socialism and what have you. But we're with him all the way in terms of, opposing the genocidal war on Palestine. We have obviously the YCL and the RCP and what have you. And I think there's lessons to be learned from the RCP over the last 12 months, socialist appeal beforehand. And I'd say actually there's probably 3 big lessons from the election campaign so far. I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll just run them off very quickly. First, be bold. Be bold and be open, and you will find an audience. Secondly, fight to be the opposition. Not a big fan of reform, not a big fan of Farage, but what he has done is he has fought to be fighting to be the opposition. That is what we need from the working class. That's what we need in terms of working class organisation and communists to come together in an independent party, which is what Ed has outlined. And, well, yeah, the third is unity in organisation. I know me and Chris have sat together in many rooms over many different years, hoping for that kind of unity, not always agreeing on what kind of unity that would take, but maybe in the days to come, we will also do the same thing, but we'll do better next time. And we will, be able to unite on a higher basis and actually begin to, make some real headway in building and fighting for a communist and working class opposition in Britain.
Thanks very much, Chris. I hope that's given people time and an opportunity to get your ideas together for any questions or for any further comments. So can I see who's got your hand up?
Matthew's got his hand up.
Matthew's got his hand up, Nick, and so did.
Okay, well, I can't see that. Sorry, just 1 second. Matthew, you come in.
And Ethan had his hand up.
Okay, it's the way my screen's set up. Sorry about that. Matthew, Matthew Jones.
Yeah, hiya. Hi, comrades. Yeah, thanks for the discussion. It's it's useful. I think there's various trends happening here. I mean, I think over a long period, what you're seeing, of course, is the crisis of bourgeois democracy. I mean, if you here in Glasgow, you can plot it almost. I mean, when there was first the universal suffrage in the 20s. Once we'd forced them into conceding that, and then the point is that the bourgeoisie is not democratic by its nature. It had to be forced to give the universal suffrage, and of course it's then used it. It's incorporated it, into its own ideology, but of course it's not something that's native to it. You started off with a situation where over 80% of people voted in Glasgow in the 20s, and now we're down to a situation where less than 50% of people would vote. Traditionally, now it's become a pattern over the last couple of decades, and it's clearly because actually, of course, bourgeois democracy doesn't deliver anything for the working class. And that is the issue, that none of these people actually, the standard parties of bourgeois democracy actually deliver anything. So why would people vote for them? And you can see that also is going to be the thing here, is there is no enthusiasm in this election for the standard parties, but there is actually a hatred of the Tories, including by large numbers of people who used to vote for the Tories. And this is what's going to happen: is the Tories are going to get hammered because other people do not vote for them. Whereas you expect actually the level of actual turnout will go down because people don't see an alternative. I think that is also an issue in terms of, as you say, the unions. I mean, a situation where, the problem is, of course, that the unions are the only weapon the class has, and therefore, we see all this stuff breaking through. The strike wave and so on, and of course, some of the attacks that are going on, and the unions are the only thing that people have in order to resist that, and that in those terms is going to get worse. We've got some really there's going to be some quite vicious battles in Scotland in the public sector, because obviously there's huge cuts coming down the line, and they're already happening in things like education in particular. So it's that issue. How do we have actual fighting organs in the workplace which are not incorporated? And I think the other thing is the question, obviously, the bourgeoisie itself is now working on the basis of abandoning democracy. I mean, if Trump gets elected, which is a possibility, what you're looking at is a move against, and it's already happening by both the Democrats and the Republicans in the US, away from democracy, from the democratic structures. Which is going to be quite profound, and going to change the nature of politics in the world, in those terms.
Matthew, I'm going to stop you there for now.
Okay, all right, thank you
very much. I think also there was a bit of feedback coming. I think it was from yours, because you were the only one with a mic open. So, Ethan, do you want me to read out your question, or do you want to read it out yourself and develop it? Okay, so I'm going to call Ed back in a minute, but Ethan G has posed a question that Ed might want to comment on in addition to the other things that he was going to say. My connection keeps dropping, so I'll ask a question here. A comrade mentioned the SPD, and I was thinking of how the SPD aimed to intervene in every aspect of working class life. This is something I'd like to see happen in between elections. I'm aware of the dangers of liquidizing your politics into the broader movement, but I'd be interested to hear the comrades' views on this. So Ed, I've seen your hand up, but I also see that Kate's got her hand up. So I'm going to call her in first and then come back to you if that's okay. So Kate.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Kate, thanks.
Yeah, okay. I haven't studied the website or anything or manifesto, sorry about that. So I don't feel like I've got anything I can say about that, but it's just kind of a few questions and something about trade unions. I wanted to say I think it's really courageous what you've been doing and bold and brave. I wanted to ask if you really think you have a chance of being elected and if that's what you want, and if people said they would vote for you, people you talk to on the doorstep, or whether they were put off by the idea of communism. I've been looking at the different candidates standing, and I think there are actually some really good people standing for the Workers' Party. I don't actually like Galloway particularly, and I think the programme is really worrying in some areas, but the actual people standing are good, and they want to get elected as well. They're kind of very determined, and some of them have links in the areas in the area that are standing, and I kind of really respect that. I listened to Mick Lynch on Novara Media. It was a long interview talking, his views about what's happening and stuff. And he's like really pro the Labour Party, and was just saying that although Starmer's done all these awful things, Labour Party's always been bad, and is the party the working class look to. And he thinks that if Labour get elected, unions can push for reforms. He doesn't like revolution, he likes reforms, and he thinks that's a realistic thing for working class people. And it's very patronising for people to stand for communism and talk about Marx and Lenin and that kind of thing. I was sitting there listening to this and I was thinking, oh my God, really, I'm pretty stupid, thinking that there should be an alternative to the Labour Party. It kind of affected me. And I've been talking to a lot of people about Labour and what's happened. And I just say, well, I actually don't feel I can really vote, certainly not our candidate. And I would vote for a left person, independent. We don't really have one. And a lot of people saying, well, we just have to vote Labour to get rid of the Tories, however bad Labour are, people are convinced, and that's the only hope. So I'm just interested in what kind of hope you managed to give people an inspiration through your conversations. And I thought Mick Lynch's view was quite interesting because he was supposed to be a kind of very challenging trade union leader. He was also quite more conservative than I've ever heard him about immigration as well. Anyway, I'll stop there.
Kate, thanks very much. Some great points there. So, Ed, I'm going to call you back in because you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I think I'll deal with some of the points that Kate raised first because they're excellent points, and then I'll turn to Ethan's message in the chat. I think what really came across quite strongly on the doorstep, so to speak, is that while people, of course, people have political awareness. People aren't stupid, they want to know about political ideas and things like that. But this was clearly the first time that anybody had ever approached 99% of these people and talked to them about what communism was. or for that matter, what capitalism was and what's wrong with it. So I think that we need to be aware that that's the level that we're operating at, that our movement is so far back and lacks presence in so many layers of society that there isn't the first of all, there isn't a basic awareness of many of the kind of key concepts that we want to talk to people about. You know, what is capitalism? What does it mean to labour for a wage? Is there an alternative to that? What's that alternative called? People have never been approached with these ideas in most cases. It also means actually that a common fear that people have of going on knocking on doors or something comparable to that situation and taking communist ideas out into to the masses, if you want to think of it that way. People are commonly afraid that they're going to get a lot of grief or aggro. You know, people who hate the idea of communism and you know, have swallowed every lie that's been told about communism in the media and all of this. Actually, our experience is you barely ever encounter that. I encountered in our last door knocking session one person who said that he didn't want to speak to me because we were communists, and he was perfectly polite about it. He just said, "No, I don't agree with communism and what it's done in history, but I respect your opinion. But no, I'm not going to talk." So that's all that you encounter. I think. I just want to share my screen briefly, actually. I think I can do it, if that's all right. And I'll just do it this way. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is part of a leaflet that we got through our door where we live. And I should say, I don't live in Manchester Central. I live in Stretford and Urmston, which is a constituency to the south of that. But this is a leaflet that we got through our door. And you can see there, a nice Union Jack, Britain deserves better, secure and managed borders against illegal immigration, support the successful integration of migrants into British society, a fair points-based immigration system. Well, I've sent this to 2 or 3 people who I know who are relatively politically aware, not full-time left-wing activists or anything like that, but relatively politically aware, and asked them to guess which political party this is from, and all of them have said that they thought it was Reform UK. It's not. It's the Workers' Party of Britain, so George Galloway's party. I should say, of course, this is nothing to do with Paya Mashimi personally, who's the candidate in Manchester Central. This is Stretford and Urmston, so a different candidate. But I think that this gives you an idea of when people talk about the left or a broad left as a sort of amorphous space in which, well, we all agree with 90% of everything on each other, and why fall out over the 10% that we disagree on? Well, this is my answer to that, because what we see here are quite sharply reactionary ideas supporting the capitalist state having controls on where working class people can go and live their lives, and supporting secure borders, which of course means a violent enforcement of a border regime, which results in people dying in the Channel, dying in the Mediterranean, all of these things that we see on the news. And we see that. And this is something, these are the ideas that we actually need to fight against within our movement, because they are actually hostile to the working class as an international class. And so I'll stop sharing my screen there, because I think I've made the point. But I think this is something that we really need to talk about, looking beyond the election, because of course, as Kate quite rightly pointed out, there's been a drift in this election with a range of different independent candidates or broadly left-wing candidates, but no real kind of serious interrogation of what a lot of them actually stand for, what their program is, what sort of society they want, beyond being against the genocide in Gaza and supporting some vaguely left-wing policies like funding the NHS and providing decent housing and things of that nature. But it's once you get into a conversation about what sort of society we actually need, that differences like this will start to emerge. And I say they are important differences. I'm just going to deal with Ethan's message, which I thought was really interesting and makes a really important point. Because, of course, if as our group of communists, if we simply intervened in this election and then said, right, we'll see you again in 2029, and we hope you vote for us in 2029, well, we would achieve less than nothing, effectively. And I think that that's absolutely right. We want to argue for elections to have their place as a tactic that the communist movement can make use of. We think that even though the elections we have are not really democratic and there's lots of limitations to them, and Parliament certainly isn't democratic and there's lots of limitations to that, these are all aspects of the existing system which we can use to our own advantage if we do it smartly and do it in the right way. But beyond that, of course, we need to work out how it is that we're going to actually reach people with our message in between those elections and in all sorts of different facets of their lives. And so it's going to involve meeting people in their workplaces, engaging in the struggles that they're going through in their workplaces, in their communities to make their own lives better, setting up institutions through which the working class can achieve things for itself and improve its own cultural existence. The SPD, which Ethan referred to, had a range of hundreds and thousands of different institutions, everything from table tennis clubs to hiking clubs to 1,000,001 newspapers, all of the things that everything that you could possibly want in terms of a cultural and political avenues for emancipation. They sought to provide it. And there's a lot of criticisms of that I think could be made. And of course, we don't want to get lost in just creating a movement which services itself, because what's crucially important at all times is we need to keep our eyes on the prize and what's the end goal we're working towards. But all of these things are how we make a strong movement which is present in all layers and all areas of society. Everybody should know somebody who's a communist, and then they can become a communist too. So I think I've talked enough, but that's
Thanks,
my
Ed.
response.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call in Soraya.
Yeah. So I think there are thousands of people like us. I think that, and they're out there, and it's a question of that, not that we're unique, but that we need to engage and find the way of contacting those people. And I think that it's really positive that there is a group of communists who feel able to stand in Manchester. I'd ask questions about the people you've managed to gather around you, who are involved, who are leading this campaign. Are they workers? Are they working class students? Are they working class unemployed? How big is the group? It must be excellent that you stood in the local elections and you've grown from that and been able to launch this campaign. Just one thing I think it was Ed was saying earlier about when you were knocking on the doors, there's not a basic awareness of many of the key concepts. Isn't it how we pose the questions? Because I think that people on sometimes it can be a very basic level that you're talking to, do actually agree about what I would call the key concepts. It's just a question of the language that we use, and that's not being patronizing, but it's just I think there's a risk of being patronizing if we think that people don't appreciate things. It's important, the language and how we get to talk to people in a way that is not like, and I'm not suggesting anybody, and I've no idea how any of communist futures talk to people, but so I'm not suggesting anything, but it's just using a language that is everyday language and not the language of sort of writing and that. But I think that people do agree, and a lot of people that you talk to actually have that idea, but perhaps it hasn't been put into the idea, well, actually, this is what communism is, and it's as simple as that this society doesn't work, and that we need a different one where there's democracy and the ruling class, the working class organise society and decide what happens rather than a tiny minority. Just one thing very briefly, referring to what Minnie was saying about, sorry, not Minnie, it was Kate, sorry, apologies, about Mick Lynch. I mean, the role of union leaders is to continue, isn't it, and persuade people of the myth that the Labour Party is the only alternative, that you can just have the Labour Party in power and things will be all right, because they want to consciously, or perhaps not being generous, perhaps it's not conscious, I don't know, I think it is, they are interested in maintaining their position of power inside capitalism, and they fulfill a very important role for capitalists. And so it doesn't surprise me that Mick Lynch comes out with something like that at all. And it just shows, doesn't it, that you have to have union leaders who are not having a privileged lifestyle, just as with MPs, that it's the same, living on the same wages as the people that they represent. And that's why they are the way they are, because they don't do that. They move into a world of privilege, and they want to maintain that world.
Thanks, Soraya. I'm going to ask Chris to come back, unless it's a hand from some time ago. Is that a new hand, Chris?
It is a new hand, and I'll start by apologising because I've actually got to go to another thing now. So okay. It's very cheeky to stay and talk and then to sort of not listen to the response, but I am going to stay it. 2 points. I'm really glad that Ed threw up the Workers' Party of Britain thing there. I mean, I avoided it in my earlier conversation. I refer to them as proto-fascist. By that, I mean, this is National Socialist Workers' Party, 1923 Germany style. You've got somebody who is so reactionary on virtually everything that he is a positive danger to the movement. I think there's a lot of very good Muslim people who are really bothered by Palestine who've got embroiled with him. But I think loads more have actually stood as independents because they're not taken in by him and they don't trust him. So anyhow, I think that's a danger for us to have to address in the very near future after the election. My second point is actually over audience for development. There are a lot of people, certainly around in Manchester, and I know that's affected by being a massive student city with a very densely concentrated student city, who are incredibly involved in a very strong direct action way in very radical confrontations with the state of British politics, the powers that be, massive anti-raid networks willing to defend migrants who are threatened, people doing loads of stuff around Palestine, not impressed by the word communism as a rule because it equals Stalinism to them, and they are not interested in what that meant. They are very autonomist. A lot of them call themselves anarchists, and I think it's more like I'm not an organised person, and they're incredibly reluctant to become organised. Some that I know have started getting involved in trade unions recently. That's really good. Another area where similar people but different are very active is in the tenants' unions, particularly the Greater Manchester Tenants' Union, rather than Acorn, but there is an improvement in that situation. So I think it's one thing looking at the sort of trade unions, whereas, as Chris and Edwin knows, an area I've been very heavily involved in sort of all time. But there's this, I think, a really large network of people. Last part of this, one of them who is in my union branch, who's very involved, leading role in the anti-raids networks, I was talking to her in the pub after the branch meeting a couple of months back. And I was sort of saying the thing that puzzles me at my age is when I was 50 years younger and getting involved, we were all getting involved in communist organisations or socialist organisations, and it was being in that organisation that was key. Her generation is absolutely the opposite. And yet what she said to me was really interesting. She said, I totally get why you want that. I actually do feel like I want that, but I don't know what it is. And I don't know how to find it, you know, because they're so autonomously not into being organised while being good organisers. It's incredibly complex. And on that note, I really do apologise. I can't listen to any response to what I've just said. Sorry about that.
No worry, Chris. We'll see you again at another meeting, I hope.
I should imagine so.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm going to chair myself if I may, because so first of all, I think that the Manchester comrades should be congratulated for taking this initiative. It's a very encouraging small step. I completely agree with Chris. It is just a small step, a small straw in the wind, so to speak. It's a cell, if you like, of what we want on a mass scale. And the problem that we have in Britain, as elsewhere, is the absence of a mass party that argues and puts forward the argument on a regular basis about the need to have a completely different form of society, one in which there is no exploitation of workers for profit. That basic relationship would not exist. We would have collective ownership of the means of production and democratic planning for need and not for profit. I think those are very, very simple concepts, and they're very easy to understand. And actually most workers, if you put things like that, would say yes, but they then might have a query about, is it possible, you'll never get it, and all that sort of things. But the conversation is started. So it's really good that a small group of comrades in Manchester is going out on the doorstep and putting those arguments forward. There are other people who are trying to do it, and the problem is that they're in different organisations, and those other parties, I think, unlike the comrades in Manchester, see that their party is the end result. They just want to build their party. Whereas if I'm not misunderstanding things, the comrades in Manchester see themselves as part of a broader project in which they will be part with other communists, other socialists, to building of a new party in which there can be differences, but agreement on what the ultimate goal is. And I think that that's really, really important. I think it does seem to me that perhaps the comrades got taken, like everybody else, by surprise, and the election was called. So perhaps explain some of the deficiencies, if you like, in the material. Personally, I think that the material is very well written. What we lack is an absence, or what we have rather is an absence of communist propaganda, of socialist propaganda, of an argument for an alternative society. So it's very good that the Communist Future Comrades have got that on their website. If I have some criticisms, and they obviously need to be taken in proportion, given what I've said, it's perhaps that the programme isn't concrete enough. I would say it can appear a little too abstract, a little too ethereal, but these things can be resolved and corrected through discussion and experience and so on. But if you compare it with, for example, go to Jeremy Corbyn's website. He's produced a manifesto for Islington as an independent. There's not one mention of the word socialism, not one mention of the word socialist, not one mention of the word capitalist, not even describing the system that he's against. And that goes actually for a lot of the other independents, some of whom are actually quite good, but their programme is extremely limited. What we need is more communist future cells, or more cells of communists who are prepared to put the arguments out there. And one of the reasons why socialist ideas have retreated so far is because nobody goes out consistently, persistently, in elections and in between elections and argues for an alternative point of view. it's the likes of Mick Lynch and reformism. And I'll just finish on this point. What's patronizing is Mick Lynch condescending to the working class who can't possibly grasp communist ideas, and that all that they can really aspire to is a little bit of extra salt and pepper on the capitalist shit that is served up to them by Starmer and Sunak between them. And what we really need to do is get the chefs cooking and get that communist out on a mass scale. So Matthew Jones.
Can you hear me? Is my sound okay? You said it was a bit okay, right? Okay, I think there's. I mean, the thing here, of course, is that I agree with what Chris said. I think what he said was very, very interesting and useful, and his characterisation of Galloway. I mean, Galloway in particular is clearly openly flirting with fascists and encouraging fascists. I mean, if you look at the things that he put out in Rochdale, I mean, he put out one leaflet for literally on a racist basis. He put out one leaflet for Muslim voters and another leaflet for white voters, which is entirely different, and the white voters want entirely reactionary. So I mean, it is playing that. I think the other thing, of course, what we're seeing is an enormous pressure from the ruling class itself, which is what's happening. The actual impact of the destruction of Corbynism, of course, is to remove for the reformists the notion that they can talk about socialism, on any basis. They've clearly now been told not to. In almost in so many words. So you'll see, I mean, huge numbers of people, as you say, Corbyn won't talk about socialism. Feinstein, I think, mentioned socialism once in his thing for Holborn. Numbers of other people. Jamie Driscoll, for instance, won't mention socialism. Actually, had a debate with him in his post-election thing, which he said, "I will not publicly describe myself as a socialist." And it's the whole thing, and it's precisely that. Along with that, of course, obviously goes the tendency of other reformists like Mick Lynch, and the ruling class is attempting to cut this off in those terms, because obviously it sees it as a threat. At the same time, also, of course, they're trying to cut off the notion of discussing, the fact that capitalism is piling towards war. Is financing, organising, etc. The genocide in Gaza. They're all equal. They are all responsible for this. They are organising and financing and arming Ukraine to run a war against Russia, which they clearly intend to carry on, even once they run out of Ukrainians, which we can see is now or fairly shortly, and they intend a war against China. They are moving towards a world war, and they want to stop any discussion of the fact, because they know that obviously there's mass popular opposition to war. I mean, why would people want a war? But they want to stop the fact, they want to stop any discussion and so on. It's quite clear that that's what they're doing in terms of suppression. Of any discussion, and particularly, of course, any movement towards a genuine, full-scale anti-war movement, not just about Gaza and not just about whatever else, but actually to say, well, we're against these capitalist wars, and we're against the move by particularly, obviously, the decline and falling American imperialism towards World War III, which it sees as its only way out, which is a real danger.
Thanks very much. On the button, I'm going to call in John Fitzpatrick, who hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah. Hi there all. I had just a couple of thoughts, really. I actually saw a debate with Chris Williamson, the deputy leader of the British Workers' Party. With this candidate, what's her name in Manchester?
Katrina Rylance.
That's right, yeah. He had a debate with her on socialist electoral lines. And she certainly was, very critical of his party. So I think, as people have been saying, on the other hand, what Chris Williamson was saying was that George's views aren't necessarily the party's view, but it was pointed out that he actually said these things in a leaflet that went out. So it seems to me as though they are the party's view. It's crossed my mind as well that what we're seeing in France at the moment with the development of this, I think they call it the New Popular Front, with all the, when needs must, they suddenly all come together. And apparently they've got something like at the moment around 30% of the vote. So they're close to the pen. But historically, communist parties in Greece, Spain, Italy, in Germany, well, big one in Germany prior to the First World War, of course, but I'm talking about up to now. So there's quite a lot of European countries that have always had communists. I mean, there's literally hundreds of thousands of people in some of these countries that always vote communist. And communist mayors, they got this, they got that. But it always seems to be under the control of kind of a mixture of the unions and the the actual kind of Communist Party itself, which tends to have kind of Stalinist thing about it. Lots of Stalinists in his party. So, yeah, that's it really.
Thank you very.
So I'd mention that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. Toby.
Here we go.
Okay. You can hear me, yeah?
Yes.
I want to endorse what's been said by Chris Jones and Matthew Jones.
Toby, before you just develop your contribution, just beware of what you say and how you say it. If I can say that in a comradely fashion, you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean, and I will only criticise the programme of the Workers' Party in the same way as I did in my intervention in the debate between Catriona and Williamson. I intervened actually after Catriona had spoken and before Williamson had actually turned up. I'm not going to say anything that though people must assume, I suppose, that the Workers' Party has got a massive membership, that it can field 150 candidates, which surprised me that it can, but it can. Well, Tusk, which has been working for years and does have support outside the ranks of the Socialist Party, and puts up people like Dave Nellis, only seems to be able to put up I'm not quite clear how many, because I'm not in the UK, but I mean, I assume somewhat less than that, unlike, say, in 2015, where I think Tusk managed to put up 100 in 2015. But people probably had more notice of the election. But I do think the Workers' Party is a red-brown party, if I can say that. And I therefore think that whilst I would call for a vote for Jeremy Corbyn or Emma Dent Code or quite a number of independents and a vote for the Tusk candidates, and even though I have reservations about the Morning Stars Communist Party, if it were the only left alternative, I'd call for a vote for them. And if we were talking about the Communist League, which I thought to be of what was once a Trotskyist group, which then became pro-Cuban, I don't know their position on Palestine. I would be, if they were the only left alternative, say, vote for the Communist League. But what I would not say is no votes for the Workers' Party. That it will be terrible after the election if it's the largest allegedly left-wing organisation in the UK, absolutely, or in the British mainland, be absolutely terrible. It's the Workers' Party of Britain, and I believe the remnants of the Workers' Party that was originally came out of official Sinn Féin still exists in the 6 counties. So we are talking about the Workers' Party of Britain. I think it's a dreadful thing, if I'm allowed to say that, and it's not just the things which allegedly are personal views, according to Williamson, of Mr. Galloway. That is the stuff about homosexuality and stuff about abortion. That, you know, whether that is or isn't the case, that it's just personal views. Now, the position on immigration, as we can see from the leaflet, is very utterly racist, and the use of the Union Jack is ultra nationalist. And if we're socialists or communists, we do not believe in socialism in one country. We believe in international socialism or international communism, and we don't discriminate against the poor and the workers who flee as a result of climate change and oppression and war to the shores of Britain. We don't want them to drown in the Channel any more than we want them to drown in the Mediterranean. So look, that's my position there. The other thing I wanted to say,
just one last point.
Yeah, the last point is that even in countries that have had a mass communist party, unfortunately, communist candidates, and I'm talking here about Livorno and about the municipality next door to Livorno, where I now live, right? In Livorno, there were two, there was one communist group standing for mayor, and there was another communist group, Rifondazione, which was a part of a coalition supporting some other left person for mayor. Both the communist list got less than 2% in both cases. In the municipality where I live, a communist candidate supported by 3 communist groups working together actually got 8%, but he came 5th.
Right, Toby, I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you very much. We're going to be discussing the European elections at the next meeting, I believe. So thanks for that. Now, Chris, you're going to sum up the discussion, I believe.
Well, that's quite a job.
It is, but okay. So I'm going to give you about 5 to 8 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I thought the discussion was really interesting. I think one thing we've not touched on quite a lot, but I know it has obviously been touched on in other discussions, is the absence of Palestine in the election. I think when you look at the national discourse and the debate, you know, Palestine is basically not mentioned. So therefore you have a ragtag group of independents, some better than others. I mean, Andrew Feinstein looks like on a human level, a very excellent campaigner and someone that comrades should vote for and campaign for if they were down there. But then also we do have the Workers' Party, and Toby and Ed has pointed out some very serious problems with the Workers' Party of Britain and their red-brown alliances and what have you. But still, I think in many constituencies, many people, particularly young workers, who are incensed at Britain's role in the Middle East and role in Palestine, will go and vote for them. And I think that is a mark against us as communists, as revolutionary socialists, as the working class movement. And I say it's a mark against us because we have failed to be as ballsy and as bold and to get our act together and put up good, solid internationalist candidates in every single constituency or in many constituencies. So, you know, I will not fault someone for going out and voting for the Workers' Party. But what I will do is, you know, we should raise our ire at ourselves, at our own movement, at our own ranks for failing to provide what Nick spoke about earlier in terms of serious organisation, in terms of a party, serious alternatives in terms of the ideas of socialism, the programme of communism and what have you. I mean, that's on us. And I think that's where I would go with that. Chris, who's now left, he raised a very good point about activism. There are lots of activist groups in Manchester, and there have been for a long time, and what have you. And this is an absolutely amazing work taking place around Palestine. Tenants organising, and within the trade unions and what have you. There is a lot of good work going on. But what we've had for 30 plus years, we've had all these movements. They've come and gone. We've had poll tax, it came and gone. We've had more ephemeral movements. You know, we've had environmental movements that have come back and forth and what have you. What we've lacked out of all of them is anything concrete or anything that has lasted and drawn together all of those forces into something substantial that could become an opposition, a serious opposition to the status quo. And I think when we talk about Communist Party, when we talk about fighting for an alternative, what we are trying to do is to draw all of these threads that we see, not just in Manchester, but around Britain, what have you, all of these comrades into a single tapestry of struggle that has a common purpose and a common project. And that is what we are lacking. So we our biggest task for Marxists, for communists right now is the fight for a communist party, is the fight to draw our forces together, to be a serious force in society, and that is not disrespecting the work that activists do across the city or across the country, but that is to say that we can do better, we can bring all of this together and we can make real change come about. One of the things that Nick raised also is about, one of the things I wanted to draw on what Nick said actually is about the formation of the CPGB, the first CPGB, which was a collection of parties, of small groups. You'd have a small group of comrades that were independents, maybe in the south of Wales, but also you'd have the bigger formations like the British Socialist Party and what have you, and they all came together and they all fought over how that party would come into being, and all participated in that. And in sense of what I see, and I don't speak on behalf of Communist People, I just speak for myself here, the way I see the work that we are doing is that we are a small contribution to something bigger, something greater that needs to come about, and that when that time does come about, that we have a group of comrades in Manchester who are able to work together, have common organisation, and actually can participate and contribute to the formation of a communist party that would take everything that we are doing, beyond, the limited skills and resources and what have you, that the fractured and current state of the British left, and particularly the communist left.
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. What I would say is, I'll end with this. There's a quote from Rosa Luxemburg, and she's it's from 1918, so a bit of a different time. She starts by saying that the liberation of the working class must be the work of the working class itself, which says the Communist Manifesto. And the working class is not a few hundred elected representatives who control society's destiny with speeches and rebuttals. Even less is it the 2 or 3 dozen leaders who occupy government offices. The working class, that is the broad mass itself, only with its active cooperation in overthrowing capital can the socialization of the economy be prepared. So that is where we stand in terms of all of these other projects, all of these other unity projects, all these Corbyn projects that may come about. It's where we stand in terms of the New Popular Front in France. The New Popular Front in France wants to manage the French state. That's the French army. That's its French alliances in NATO, the rest of it. That's the same thing with Britain and the broad left formations that we've seen. So we stand for working class power and the working class doing it for itself. And we are using the elections to make those arguments to say that it is not us standing, it's not Katrina who is going to, bring communism to Manchester. It's not a communist party with elected representatives that is going to pass legislation in parliaments that will bring in communism. No, what we are saying and what we are trying to argue for is that it is the working class, the majority in society, that when they come together, when they fight together, when they realize their own interests, they will be the ones that will change society. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you very much, Ed. Excellent contributions from the comrades in Manchester. Thank you very much to everybody who participated in the discussion. Really good points. Thanks to everybody who attended, and I hope you enjoyed it. I think tonight's discussion really shows the magnitude of the task that we have before us and the seriousness with which we need to approach it, and that we, in talking about socialism from a Marxist point of view, have set ourselves a key project of helping to bring about the new mass working class communist socialist party that we need, and that Chris was just talking about there at the end. Standing in elections is one part of that. As Ethan mentioned, we have to do all the work in between consistently. Now, in the course of the discussion, there were various things that I've made a note of that I think we need to come back to. For example, what is the nature of the trade unions in the modern era? Chris has just talked about France. There's the question of the rise of the far right, but the question of how to defeat fascism is an important issue. So just to very quickly finish, in a fortnight's time, on the 8th of July, we've got a discussion reviewing the general election results and the tasks that will face socialists, communists in the period ahead. On the 22nd of July, we've got an assessment of the European election results, who gained, who lost, what advances did the far right make, and what does that mean for working class struggle across Europe. We've then now confirmed 2 dates which were a bit up in the air. On the 5th of August, we've got writer and housing activist Isaac Rose speaking on his new book, The Rentier City, Manchester and the Making of the Neoliberal Metropolis. We've got a Manchester theme, it seems. And then on the 19th of August, we've got Ao Lung Yu will introduce a discussion on Is China Socialist? All good discussions that I think we can look forward to. Please do send in your suggestions for topics that you want us to discuss. Please do share the bulletin to friends, comrades, family, people you think might be interested in these discussions, and point them in the direction of our website and of our YouTube channel. And with that, I'm going to thank everybody once again, wish you all the best, and see you again in a fortnight's time. Thanks very much. Good night.